Hi, Dick Rauscher here. Today we're going to be taking a look at nugget number 242, Insights from the Wilderness. My understanding of God is changing. The first is the understanding that we've had several hundred years of conflict between science, which always breaks things down into parts. In other words, science uses the Newtonian model of reality, which is that reality is a machine. Okay? And Newton said that if we understand the machine, if we break it down into small enough parts, we can understand how that machine all fits together and works, and it's all controlled mathematically. Religion, on the other hand, said, no, we're talking about whole things, the unity of the universe. And spirituality, of course, is a focus on wholeness or unity or oneness. So science and religion have been kind of beating their heads against each other for hundreds of years, and what we're realizing is that that's a battle that it just doesn't make any sense. Okay, let's look at why. There are three things that have changed under my understanding of God. The first change, and that little symbol indicates change. That's a symbol that I use for change. So the first change comes from quantum physics. And the Newtonian machine ran into some really, really serious problems when we tried to maintain mathematical formulas, like something in motion stays in motion, or, friction slows it down. It was all mathematically predictable until you get into quantum physics. And Einstein said it the best. He said, once you enter the subatomic realm, we end up with spooky forces. And what he meant by that is that all of a sudden things didn't work mathematically like a machine. For example, if you look at subatomic particles carefully, just looking at them, just the power of consciousness, observing them, changes them. That's been proven. The other is that two particles can be in the same place at the same time. Another is that you can change this particle, and if it's linked with this particle, you can take this second particle to the other side of the end of the universe, okay? Trillions of light years away. And you can impact this, and instantly, over here on the other side of the universe, this one reflects the change. Now, obviously, we ran into a real problem, because mathematics were not sophisticated enough to be able to handle some of these spooky forces that we were encountering. So that was the first thing that began to change my understanding of God. The second came when I began to read more into biology and this concept of autopoietic, which is really just, again, a big word. I've covered this in previous nuggets, but it's just a big word for self-creating, self-organizing, and self-maintaining. And all life hits those criteria. Okay? It all begins with chemistry. So if we look at the universe, for example, everything began with just helium and hydrogen. And then the helium and hydrogen began to form more complex and more involved elements. They formed into stars. Those stars went supernova after cooking all those elements and spewed out new chemical elements, which then were used later, billions of years later, to create, for example, our sun. And our sun did the same thing. It created more chemistry and then spewed out into the universe when they died the building blocks that comprised our planet. So what we find is that the entire universe, now there's some some purists are arguing about whether we actually are in a living universe, but very few people anymore are doubting that Gaia, our planet, nature, if you will, is a autopoietic force. In other words, it's self-creating, self-sustaining, self-organizing. Change number 3 came when I began to study religion, okay? And this change began quite a few years ago, well before I entered seminary. But religion has been changing because religious scholars are beginning to recognize that the texts, the sacred religious texts, are metaphor. They can't be taken literally, because if you take them literally, then you lose the wisdom that the first century people, who were not very scientifically literate, so they had to use metaphors and ways, the words that they had available to them to talk about reality, okay? And those were metaphors, okay? Now, what does all that mean? Well, what I try to point out in the article is that these are just maps of reality. This was a map, the Newtonian machine. Quantum physics is a new map of reality. Biology is a new map, an autopoietic map of reality. Religion are just maps and metaphors of reality. So what we're talking about is we have a whole bunch of different maps, but like a menu, the menu might describe the meal, but it's not the meal. You're not going to get any nutrition eating the menu. You have to eat the food. Well, the same thing. As we move into reality and these new maps of reality, what we're doing is we're re-entering spirituality and mystery. And that can only be handled with an open mind. You can't get into mystery and paradox and all of the more subtle aspects of reality unless you have an open mind that can sit and look at two sides of an issue without taking sides. Okay, that's what I call middle path in some of the nuggets. So to summarize, the way I see reality, which is God, because God for me now is reality, when we look at reality, it's so far beyond anything we can mathematically or even get our heads around. We don't even have a clue how all this subatomic stuff happens. But at any rate, for me, the spirit of the Creator that's incarnate in all of creation, every single place you look in the universe, what you'll see is the evolutionary impulse to become. What's that mean? Everything in the universe is undergoing change. And a lot of it is autopoietic. It's self-creating, self-organizing, self-maintaining chemistry. So to get away from the black and white literal thinking that has kind of dominated science and religion for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years actually, then I like to come down here and look at God as reality, and basically it's the fact that everything in the universe is changing. So when anyone tells you, or tells me anyway, that there are some things that don't change, I say, well, show me, okay? If something isn't changing, then it's been around since the Big Bang. Well, the minute you start to go in that direction, you recognize you're going to hit a wall real quick. So at any rate, this is my idea, that God is reality. The evolutionary impulse to become is incarnate. It's the spirit of the Creator incarnate in all of creation. Everything that we've known up to now are just maps. Religion's a map, biology's a map, quantum physics is another map, and the Newtonian machine concept is another map, okay? As is, by the way, spirituality, because we're talking whole parts, okay? Not little bits and pieces. We're looking at the big picture. But it's still a map, because there's still a lot of stuff in that map that's kind of spooky, okay, that we really don't understand yet. So rather than argue about who's right and who's wrong, if we approach this whole thing with an open mind and recognize that the universe and The spirit of the Creator is just creating change, and that's all it is. That's pretty hopeful, because then it says we can change, we can grow, we can evolve, we can become. Okay? It's a fun article to write. I've got a lot of good information in it. I think you'll enjoy reading it. I go into a little more detail, obviously, in the article. If you click the link below, it'll take you to the article, the page, the Nugget page, the blog page, and the other one will take you to the video, this video that you're probably watching. Okay? All right? Good stuff. Take a read. Don't hesitate to get back to me with some comments. I love to get feedback. It's how I grow too. Okay? So, we'll see you down the road. Have a good week.